yeah, just Bill, he's facilitating, so yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. So welcome everybody. Glad to have you here today. And so we'll go and we'll start with some introductions. And so you can just briefly tell us your name, location, and XR affiliation or not. And I'll just go around my screen and start to get the ball rolling. So Marguerite, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, yes, I'm Marguerite from Stroud in the UK. And yes, amazing to see such a smaller group, but some great people to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you. James?
James Green in Syracuse, New York in the US.
Okay. Rupert?
Yes, I'm Rupert Reed. I'm a professor at the University of East Anglia. I've got a book coming out soon called Extinction Rebellion, Insights from the Inside. I'm a national spokesperson for us and I do political liaison. And I'm delighted to be here for another Empathy Circle.
Great, great to have you. Thank you. April?
Hi, yes, I'm April. I'm here from the Guardianship and Visioning XR UK. I've just finished the 11 series of principles and values, and I thought I'd show up for the demands as well. I'm really enjoying the series. I'm really enjoying hearing other rebels unfolding of thinking. So yeah, more of that. Thank you.
Great, and thanks for being here. Maureen?
I'm from Ireland, and I have been attending the other 11 sessions. I think I missed 2 in the middle, and they were very interesting. They were very, let me say, I enjoyed them on a Saturday evening during this time of lockdown. I've been following the Extinction Rebellion activities even today and very early this morning. The SR2, is that what you call it in England? So.
Thank you, Maureen. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm from Galway in Ireland as well, and I've been following the Extinction Rebellion, but also from an empathy circling perspective. I kind of believe quite firmly that it's how we can bring about a lot of positive change in the world. So I want to kind of spend a lot of my time developing the skills and seeing how I might somehow put that to service. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, great to have you here. We really appreciate that. Gregory?
Yes, hi. I'm in New Mexico, USA. And I'm interested in the work of Joanna Macy, and I see this as very connected. She calls it the work that reconnects, and so I'm kind of, and also there's a local Extinction Rebellion group in the city near us, Santa Fe, New Mexico. But I'm not too involved with them. I'm more involved with Veterans for Peace. Anyway, I'm rambling here. I noticed, I'm sorry for using first names. I'm losing track of who's who here. Rupert said he might have to leave early, and I'm not sure if I can hang in here. We have a drought on, and there's water in the ditch today, so I need to irrigate while I've got the chance. So I'm hoping I can hang in here for most of this.
Okay, well, great. Hang in for as much as you can, and if you have to leave, we certainly understand. It'd be great to have your contributions while you're here. And I hope you get enough of the experience to really, see what it's all about. If not, another time. Okay, Nicole, welcome. We're just doing introductions. And, I don't know, give you some time here. I'm putting you on the spot, sorry. So we're just doing introductions. So if you can just kind of say, who, where you are, and any XR affiliation, if you have one, that would be great as an introduction. Thank you.
Me right away.
Yes, you right away.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I'm here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, I'm with XR Calgary, and I also connect in with XR in Edmonton and all over the kind of Southwest Canadian areas, and now down into the States through empathy circles, really, mostly.
Great, great.
Yeah,
Well,
and I
great
also
to have.
have a regenerative culture like side hustle called Awakening the Village.
Okay, great. All right, Edwin.
Edwin Rutch from San Francisco Bay Area, part of the XR Empathy Circle work group, as well as XR San Francisco.
Great. And I'm Bill Filler. I'm part of the Empathy Circle and the Empathy Circle XR work group. And I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I believe we've gone through the introductions. And so I'll turn it over to Rupert to talk about the first demand, Tell the Truth.
Yeah, so thanks, Bill. And it's, as I say, really a pleasure to be back here at another Empathy Circle. Edwin asked me which of these demands I'd like to introduce, and I was tempted by all of them, but I chose demand 1 because for me, that's where it all flows from, really. The demand to tell the truth, which we frame in Extinction Rebellion primarily as a demand that we make upon governments. But I like to emphasize that it actually applies to everybody. It has to apply to everybody. It has to apply very noticeably to the media, without whom it's not possible for us to tell the truth on a societal level. And it has to apply very strongly to us, which is something that I've emphasized in the work that I've done over the last 18 months with Extinction Rebellion. And that has a number of consequences, including for the other demands, which maybe I'll come to. So this demand, I claim, is the one from which all the others flow. What do I mean by that? Well, if you tell the truth about the crisis, and as I say, telling the truth starts at home, it's not something you just outsource to the government. Once you're in congruence with that truth, once you're in alignment with it, then it's impossible for everything not to change. And that, of course, is absolutely essential to our method in Extinction Rebellion. That is why we do talks like Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. Also the talks that I do, talks with stark titles like This Civilization is Finished, where I set out things very, very starkly as I see them, and invite people to draw the consequences from that. It's also obviously at the basis of what we do on the media, when we try to be very authentic about the situation as we see it, including authentic with sharing our emotions about that as much as possible, which, maybe a little of that will happen here this evening. That, in my opinion, is without question central to the enormous world historical power of our greatest supporter in XR. I'm referring to Greta Thunberg, who has this extraordinary way of telling the truth quite sort of calmly, clearly, and factually, but also allowing herself to emote highly authentically. She sometimes shows her anger. She sometimes shows her fear. She sometimes shows her grief, and she's cried on TV and so on. I think this is absolutely essential to why she's become the magnificent phenomenon that she is. And when we tell the truth, then, and when we are in alignment with that truth, then it is clear that we have to make very, very strong demands about what needs to be done. So basically, demand 2 follows from demand 1 directly in that way, it seems to me. Furthermore, when we then think about how to implement demand 2, another part of the truth that we need to tell is that our democracy is broken. And this is a very important respect in which it's not correct to understand XR as a purely environmental or ecological movement. We're also a movement for democratic renewal and reform. That's absolutely essential because, as I say, part of the truth is not just that there's this terrible ecological crisis ravaging the earth. It's also essentially to do with why that crisis is ravaging the earth, which is essentially to do with the media and government not telling the truth, and in particular with governments not acting in the ways that we need them to act. And that, of course, is the basis for the third demand, the demand to move beyond party politics and beyond ideology into democratic renewal via citizens' assemblies. So okay, I suppose in a way I've cheated a little bit here. I've been asked to talk about demand 1, but I've ended up saying something also about demand 2 and demand 3. But my claim would be that that is inevitable, because the reason I wanted to talk about demand 1 is that demand 1 is the first demand for a reason, namely that, as I see it, all the other demands flow from that one. Now, I want to go a little bit further, following up what I alluded to at the opening of my remarks, to do with how bad the situation now is, and the responsibility on Extinction Rebellion to continue fully telling the truth about that. Why do I stress that? Well, because I think it's incredibly tempting for us, as it has been for virtually all previous ecological movements, to shy away from the harshest elements of that truth. Now, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely clear that Extinction Rebellion has succeeded to the quite considerable extent that it has succeeded already, although, you know, nowhere near enough, maybe about, you know, 10% of where we need to get to. We've succeeded to the extent that we have succeeded in changing public opinion and making a vast impact upon the UK and to some extent in places all over the world, because of the way that we've bucked the trend of previous environmental organizations and movements to shy away from telling the truth. The clue's in the name, Extinction Rebellion, right? When we first formed, there were many people lining up to tell us, you can't call a group Extinction Rebellion, you're just going to scare everybody off. You're going to scare them off by saying that we need to rebel. That's too much, especially for British people who don't like to rock the boat too much and so on normally. And you're going to scare them off even more with this word extinction. You know, you can't name the fact that actually we're pushing all these other species extinct and say furthermore even that we might end up being one of those species. Even if it's true, you can't do it, they told us. And it turns out they were wrong. We did it and it worked. And why did it work? Well, I think it worked to a large extent because there's a lot of people now who are not prepared to put up any longer with the notion that we have to go softly, softly. That's been tried for so long, and climate scientists have told the truth in their very sort of straight-laced kind of factual way, without going into worst-case scenarios normally, without using the precautionary principle very often, certainly without revealing their own emotions about the matter, with very, very rare exceptions. That's what climate scientists have done. And environmental organizations have gone around saying things like, well, it'll be okay if we just change our light bulbs, or it'll be okay if we, you know, really all pull together in the right direction, and we're just on the edge of doing it, and then they get a bit more desperate. It's 5 to midnight, but don't worry, we'll do it, we'll turn it all around. Some of you may remember the 100 Months campaign that started quite a while ago and said we've got 100 months to save the world. And well, actually it was 140 months ago that campaign started. And at the end of the 100 months, nobody went around saying, right, we failed, we now have to give up. So in a certain sense, they cried wolf. In another sense, kind of they didn't. I mean, that was obviously the time to act, or in fact, earlier than that. What we say when we say Extinction Rebellion is the situation is truly desperate. And we just cut through all the kind of nonsense that has been pervaded, and the half-truths and the kind of over-optimism, the Pollyannaism. We cut through all of that, and it resonates with people. You could say that it achieves a kind of empathic reaction from the audience of, yeah, I get that. And especially that's true if, as I say, the way we do it is authentic in the kind of way that Greta does it, including emotionally authentic. So we've cut through by telling the truth, but as I say, it's still tempting on us, still tempting for us to back away from that and to not own up to the situation when it starts to spin out of control. And that I want to claim is what's happened in the last couple of years, because it's been a couple of years now since XR was dreamed up. And that's a long time if you're saying we have to go carbon net zero, etc., within, say, 6 years. That's almost a third of the time, right? In Britain, we've had a catastrophic general election result after Extinction Rebellion made its hit. We've now got the COVID crisis, which in some ways is waking people up, in some ways is accustoming people to not commuting so much, doing more stuff online, listening to the birds sing more, etc. But it's also in some ways distracting us and risks returning many of us to our cars for protection. Most crucially, in relation to the COVID crisis, we're already seeing huge bailouts for corporate business as usual. To cut to the chase, I want to claim that it is becoming clear that the hopes that Extinction Rebellion nurtured 2 years ago when we launched are not going to be fully accomplished. We are not going to achieve carbon net zero and biodiversity loss net zero in wealthy countries like all of us are in by 2025. I mean, I can't categorically rule it out. Of course, anything could happen. You know, Trump could convert to Buddhism tonight and suddenly become a wonderful president tomorrow. You know, anything could happen. But it's not a very wise thing to plan on or to bet the farm on. So my claim, and I'll end with this thought, is that the first demand is paramount in the sense that us telling the truth now means that we actually have to start to modify the other demands, especially demand 2. And we have to come clean on the need to transformatively adapt and indeed to deeply adapt to what is coming. The first demand, as I say, is the demand from which all the others flow. And the responsibility to tell the truth never ends, especially for us. And I hope that that's a good basis, albeit I'm the first to admit a kind of challenging basis on which to begin this conversation.
Great, thank you. Certainly a great food for thought for the topic today. We want to get into the circles as quickly as possible. I believe most of you are veterans. I'm not quite sure about Gregory. I don't know. Should I go through a short explanation, Edwin? Should we do it in the breakout rooms?
I can do it.
Okay,
just checking. James, can you facilitate the circle?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So the basics of an empathy circle is, one person will be the speaker. Hopefully you saw the video in preparation, but one person is the speaker. You select who you're going to speak to, and you talk about the topic or whatever is alive for you, which is just whatever's on your mind. You're always free to share whatever's up for you. You share a little bit, and then you pause and you give the listener time to reflect back their understanding of what you said, and then you check, did they understand what I said? If no, you say it again, maybe in other words, and if they do, you continue sharing some more, and then it kind of goes back and forth for the time allotted, which is 5 minutes, and the facilitator will be doing the timekeeping. And then if you just speak a little bit and you don't have anything else to say, you can say, I feel fully heard, or indicate that you're done with your turn. And then it becomes the listener's turn to become the speaker, the active speaker, and they select someone to speak to, and they share and they get a reflection, and it kind of goes back and forth, and it goes around for the time allotted. And we have about an hour and a half for this empathy circle here. So I think that's sort of the essence of it. Some tips is, as the listener, you're just wanting to reflect back your understanding of what the person said, to just show that you understand them. You're not wanting to ask questions or kind of put your own comments and thoughts into it. And the one thing you can do, if the speaker is going on speaking a lot, and you think, oh, geez, I'll never remember, what they're saying, say, oh, please pause. Let me just reflect back what I'm hearing. So that's the one time you can sort of interrupt. I think most everyone here knows how to do it. So we have 2 circles. The first one is Bill facilitating, and the second one is James facilitating. And I'm doing tech support. So, oh, and we do a recording of the circle. If you can check, James, if I gave you record permissions, if people want to, are okay with recording in your circle.
Okay, we'll see you there.
Okay, we're into the rooms, and there'll be 5 in each circle. So.
All right. Okay, so we're all here. I'll keep time. There's a little piano riff, and it comes up if you see that. And then I have this artisanal, handcrafted sign that I'll put up there just to let you know. When you hear the timer, it's not a hard close. It's, finish your thought, get a reflection, and then we'll kind of, go on. So I invite anyone not named Bill to start speaking. Pick a listener, and we'll get it started. Okay, who would like to go? Edwin?
Let's start then. Yeah, what the heck? I'll speak to April.
Hi, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. So I connect everything to empathy. Sorry, it's like, tell the truth. What does that have to do with empathy? And so I'm just kind of thinking, about that. Like, what does that really mean? Kind of to tell the truth in sort of a broader context.
You connect everything to empathy. So you're wondering about your curiosity. Your curiosity is lit by how does empathy relate to telling the truth?
Yeah, I know. And a lot of people think telling the truth is like sharing your judgments of other people. Like, you're an asshole, you're an asshole. So that's like the truth telling is, oh, you're an asshole and I'm telling the truth. So there are some questions about what real truth is, and so, yeah, I just kind of want to kind of share that, because there's a lot of judgment being thrown around as being, truth.
I hear acknowledgement that very often when people are talking about telling truths, they are indeed sharing judgments or opinions randomly as if they are truths.
And the other aspect of telling the truth that I see is kind of what we have in the empathy circle. The people are a little shy about telling the truth. They feel vulnerable about telling the truth, and especially about, some feelings they may be having, because, people can criticize them, or, you're sort of vulnerable in telling the truth. And in the empathy circle, I see this as sort of a truth building, a place for kind of creating a safer space for telling the truth, in that slowly people develop trust that they will be heard and not be judged. Because as I'm speaking to you, April, you have to, before you judge me, you have to be able to empathize with me. And that sort of builds this trust where I can slowly be more open.
So in the acknowledgement that sharing truth from a place that isn't judgment and opinions is vulnerable, and that one of the things that people shy away from then is sharing truth when they think they're going to be judged. And so it's difficult to do, and that you recognize the Empathy Cafe creates a structure, a holding structure that allows people to unfold their truths, knowing that they're not going to be judged straight away, because the first thing, because they feel heard, because they just get what they're saying reflected back before there's any other levels of connection.
Exactly. And there's another aspect that if the speaker can be judgmental, and so I can say, you're an idiot, April, judging you,
So,
right?
Yeah. So the speaker can be judgmental, and oh,
they can say something judgmental,
and I get to repeat it.
Exactly. But it's magical when you reflect it. It takes some of the edge. It transforms the judgment into connection and listening. So there's something magical about empathizing with judgment. It transforms the judgment.
So when you hear that judgment, or when you're reflecting that judgment back, often that can allow it to transform into something else through connection and through a building of empathy.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to go with Nicole. Are you willing to listen?
I'm listening.
Wow, where to begin? I guess this certainly was one of the reasons. No, because I came into Extinction Rebellion before we ever had any demands. I came in just as when the idea was unfolding for a rebellion. And I was really clear that my participation was rooted in the fact that when it was unfolded, when the idea was unfolded to me, it was going to be rooted in telling the truth.
I think I saw you noticing how big this topic is and wondering where to start. And remembering that when you did become part of Extinction Rebellion before it was Extinction Rebellion, that you did so because you could see that it was rooted in telling the truth, or would be.
Where I was coming from with the truth was a truth that had been revealed to me in an unusual and perhaps unbelievable way, that I had already spent a few years becoming present to, reaching for support and understanding. And I was aware that whatever truths they were about to start to unleash on the world, it would involve a lot of grief from the people who heard it.
I hear you remembering that when it started, you had already been in a process of deepening into a truth that you knew was difficult, and you knew that you could see it coming, that grief would come about when this bigger truth was revealed to the world.
I guess it's not even revealing, because kind of people, there's been people revealing it for years, but as it came into a consciousness where people were unable to avoid talking about it and knowing it as a reality, then grief was going to be one of the most prominent emotions that would be stirred. And we're not very good in this culture of dealing with grief.
Yeah, you adjusted that the truth was already there, but just that speaking to it and being pointed to it, when that happened, that the grief, which we're not particularly good at, was going to be inevitable.
Yeah. And the next time that I was really conscious of that was when I went to a festival, a Buddhist festival, with some of the Rising Up people to start to talk about Extinction Rebellion and start to, feel for whether we could generate lots of interest. And one of the people there, Lizzie Orchard, decided she was going to read Jem Bendel's newly released paper on deep adaptation and read it as part of the festival.
Wow. You're remembering going to the festival early on, Rising Up, and that Jem's paper was read.
We took turns reading it. We sort of took over an empty tent in the evenings, and we took turns reading chunks of it to each other, tears rolling down our faces, and kind of supporting each other through what we were unfolding.
And you're remembering that experience of taking turns reading it and having the grief start to flow.
One of the people there, who was somebody very rooted in the work that reconnects, in fact, said, kind of raised the fact, this isn't really for a festival. Why are we doing this at a festival? And I remember Lizzie Orchard saying, I read this 2 months ago. I read this all on my own, and I had to sit in my flat all on my own for 3 days with it. And I wouldn't want anyone else to ever have to do that. So I wanted to bring it somewhere where people were open-hearted and had other things to salve the grief, and that to be together as we read it.
I hear you remembering someone questioning why something like that would be done at a festival, and that you told about how you'd first read it all alone and had sat with it alone, and how you didn't want anyone to have to be alone as they faced this, to have to be grieving alone.
Yeah, that wasn't me, that was Lizzie. Thank you. So that it was Lizzie who read it alone. And yeah, much gratitude to Lizzie, who is no longer alive, but leads for Extinction Rebellion in another place. Thank you.
I hear you honoring Lizzie and the things she did while she was here and alive, and the ripple effects that continue.
Thank you. I feel well heard.
Thank you so much. Rupert, will you hear me, please? Listen. Thank you. Question that came to me was, before the truth can be spoken and heard, what might need to happen? And that loops me back to what I heard Edwin say about how empathy is just interwoven, or needs to be interwoven for truth telling and truth hearing to be effective.
I hear you saying that there's, in a way, something that comes before truth telling and truth hearing, which is the capacity or the willingness to hear the truth spoken and to take it in, and that maybe that capacity and willingness has got something essentially to do with empathy.
Yeah, because without a field of empathy, how am I going to risk saying things that when I said them before got shut down or got me pushed away? And also, how am I going to sit there and listen while other people might be shutting each other down and be shutting themselves down, unless I have a capacity to allow the listening to happen?
So I heard that there's a vulnerability there, because what happens if you tell the truth and your listener is not willing to empathize?
Yeah, and also a vulnerable bravery too, because in order to speak and risk that kind of violence of being shut down, I need to have some kind of faith in myself that I'll be okay if that happens. Or I need to be able to kind of outsource my faith to the container and to others in the circle who will also make a stand for that space to be open.
Yeah, so there's a bravery present in anyone who steps forward to tell difficult truths, that they have to have some kind of faith that they can cope with the potential reactions, or that they can be supported somehow by other people who are around the process in order to cope with those reactions.
Yeah. And then my mind turns to the kinds of people who, like hear someone speak a truth that's true for them, and who kick back and say, no, that's wrong, that's not truth. And I can't help but, when I scan people in those circumstances, I can't help but just see fear and a fear that's holding in grief, and a fear that doesn't want to have to feel the pain of that this truth, if they were to open to it, would bring up in them. And no wonder, because so often underneath a grief for one thing, there's grief for this other thing and this other thing and this other thing, and all back into the past.
Yeah, so I hear you telling us about your ability to empathize even with those who maybe it might seem difficult to empathize with, who are reacting very negatively to truths being told, and they're perhaps using anger to keep a lid on other more difficult emotions, such as terror or grief, which lie underneath that anger. And you're telling us there of the possibility and the importance of being able to empathize with that difficult condition that those people are in.
Yeah, and then that brings to mind that kind of like little quip about Donald Trump becoming a Buddhist tonight. And, I jokingly crossed my fingers, it's like, and yet the possibility that even someone who seems so closed and so confident in this like perplexing like muddle of nonsense that maybe even he, if he had the safe space, might begin to be able to unpack all that keeps him from being able to hear and see and consider and feel.
Yeah, so in some sense you're saying it's really crucial for us to be able to hold out the possibility that no one is beyond reach, that no one is beyond transformative change, and that's part of what it is maybe for us to be able to relate to them as another human being who we could empathize with, that we can't know in advance that they won't do things that will astonish and impress us, even when it seems unlikely.
Thank you. I feel heard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to speak to April.
Would be an honor.
One thing that was brought to mind in me by what Nicole said at the end there was the way that it's possible for me to be very emotionally expressive. And I've done it sometimes in talks, and I've done it on live TV. But it's not necessarily easy, and I would like to be able to do it more. And I would like to be able to release and share some of the grief and terror and so on, which you, April, have described. Nicole was also alluding to. I would like to be able to do that because I think it would have power for our listeners. But in a way, most of all, I'd like to be able to do it because I know that it's very powerful for me when I can do it. When I was giving my little spiel earlier, my 10-minute talk, I felt some of that and sort of somehow didn't yet feel ready to express it or share it. But it was helpful to see you there, someone who I know a little bit better, who I felt was empathizing with some of the things I was saying and the difficulty of some of them, and the difficulty of facing up to this appalling reality that we're in, even while I was starting to say those things.
I heard your acknowledgement of the amount of difficulty that it is to break through the kind of lockdown, even when you sense the emotions rising about what you're talking about and sense that it's touching other people. There's a leap of to connect you to that, to being able to express it in the moment that you have sometimes spontaneously perhaps connected to, and not always been able to, and that you recognize that when you were touching on it slightly in that 10-minute introduction, that seeing myself, somebody that you recognized and had already and knew was already connected to the vulnerability in the truths and resonated with what you said, that kind of unlocked it a little, made it slightly more accessible.
Yes, thank you. And sometimes when I speak about this stuff, and especially some of the stuff I've been saying recently about how we've got to tell the truth about how things have deteriorated on balance in the last couple of years, and how we're not going to get the salvation that we still have inclined to imagining. Sometimes I feel incredibly upset, and I would like to show it, but I usually don't. And I imagine, and I know sometimes, that people I'm speaking with are incredibly upset. And and thinking about it just reminds me of how dire the whole situation is, and how we so badly need to be able to share ourselves in this kind of way, because it's really damaging to keep this kind of stuff to yourself. And I have hope that I know that when we do share it, usually on balance, things get better, even if it's hard in the process.
There was acknowledgement there in your own inability sometimes to express that publicly. You're feeling it even as you're talking and bringing people to the truths that you're present to, with just how awful the situation is, and even how it's deteriorated over the last 2 years. And now you can even see the upset. You can feel the upset in yourself, and you can even see the upset in the people with you. And you're still found some level of, I'm sensing maybe disappointment, or a wish that you could express it more fully, so that, because in the expressing it, that reaches for a depth of connection that holds people better as they get present to it.
Yeah. If it's a disappointment, I don't really think it's a disappointment with myself. I think I'm quite gentle with myself about it, and I recognize that in a somewhat patriarchal culture that we still live in, it's not been made easy for men to express these kind of things in particular. It's taken to be more legitimate for women to do so, and that's something that causes a lot of suffering among men, I think. Because the reality is, it's so desperately sad, where we're at now, and sometimes I really need to share that and be supported in that. Yeah, it's so sad.
So I hear this at the the remorse maybe that that the system that has locked down on men, particularly on it not being acceptable to express emotion that way, is really damaging in that connection, in getting present to how sad the situation is. Because if you're not expressing it, people are not connecting to the fact that you are feeling this great sadness.
Thanks, April. I feel very deeply heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill.
I'm listening.
Yeah, what I'm connected to there, I guess, brings to mind to me the fact that we've focused as Extinction Rebellion on a certain set of truths that leave a lot out, that are equally as important to be talking about, to be bringing into the awareness, if we are going to move towards transformative change. Focusing on one set of truths isn't enough.
So you're saying that these truths, they are not enough. There's it's an expanding field, and in order to really make effective change, we have to look into and investigate other truths, and or more deeply go into the original truths to then reharvest from them. It's an ongoing and growing concern.
Maybe where I'm, thank you. And maybe where I'm reaching is that the word truth for a start, as if it's a definable one thing. And it's a little bit like we've been talking about alignment with principles, as if you can simply, read the principles and decide that you're in alignment with them. So it's actually a practice. So for me, truth isn't a noun, but maybe should be seen as a verb, a truing. That each time you get closer to a truth, there's more layers to uncover.
So you're talking that truth is not simply a cognitive definition, but is a deeper, more experiential thing, and actually would look at it as a verb, like truing. In other words, living the truth and experiencing and being present with it.
Well, again, that defines it. That kind of holds it to that idea that it's one truth. And for me, the truing is getting closer to something. So the original etymology of that word coming from the carpenter who trues who's truing a piece of wood, and you hit the grain and you know it's true because it flows easily. There's something in the sensation, the physical sensation of knowing. That's a truth. So as somebody who trusts, which also is a sideways version of truth, trusts more than my intellect for knowing when something is truing, then it's the feel of it as well as the intellectual laying down of a truth. Truing is something more than the intellectual encompassment that is a truth. It feels true. And that's where the tears flow. That's where the tears are, in the sensation of truing.
Okay. So you want to, even truing might be a narrow cognitive definition. And so you really want to emphasize the multidimensional act of being or living in a truth, for the lack of a better word, sorry, and that's an experience. And that also an important part of that is the emotional truth and the felt emotional experience that allows emotions to flow, and also for emotional growth as well as other types of growth. And we can also talk about other types of growth besides just emotional and cognitive.
So in lining up what I was saying at the beginning and what I'm saying there, it's that one side of the truths about the quite, the horrendous truth of our treatment of the environment and where that's taking us. That's one set of scientific truths that you can put down and say this is provable. And there's another set of truths about the way the system has brought us there. That involves looking back in the river of time, where it's come from. And there are a whole load of other truths that are layered on top of that are not just about this is the scientific truth. This is also the truth, is these oppressions of each other, of the natural world. These are also part of the feelings that give us the knowledge of this is the truth.
So you're talking about the scientific truth, the didactic kind of provable, I can prove this sort of scientific truth. But beyond that, in order to also be effective, what I'm hearing you saying is that we have to be aware of our emotional truths and all the other layers. And I feel that I'm sensing a constant challenge to be self-aware and to be open to growth, and I get this very strong sense of kind of like a spreading tree. And in other words, it's more, and it's a process that really never ends in discovering the truth. So there's a certain amount of cognitive and emotional consistency, but also flexibility and openness to grow.
Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay. All right, Edwin?
Listening.
Okay. Wow. So it's a lot to take in. I can feel my neurons tingling. you know, and this whole idea of truth, I certainly resonated with what a lot of people in the circle have said about there's an emotional reaction to truth. I'll stop there.
Okay, you're having an emotional reaction of tingling with what's been said here, and it's like, wow, there's been a lot been said here. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think what we were talking about was what I'm feeling on the street and around me is the grief that people are feeling, and also having been a special education teacher, but in other words, seeing the same sort of psychological angst that people are experiencing in society, and seeing how abused children can't find a footing because of the same sort of shifting circumstances and contravening, you know, mandates of their lives. Boy, that was tough. Sorry about that. I apologize for that.
Yeah, so you're apologizing for the complications of what you just shared,
Right.
but you're making a parallel. What I'm hearing is a parallel between the feelings children had as a teacher, where they just can't find an orientation because of the sort of the anxiety that they might be, and the grief that they're feeling, and having that paralleled with society that you see around you is having those feelings of anxiety and grief.
Right.
And kind of
so,
a shiftingness. It's just like things aren't solid.
Yes, no, and that creates the one. I was taught very early on that, you know, there are permissive parents and there are strict parents. If they're consistent, kids can deal. But if they shift around, that's when really kids can find an emotional footing, and that causes emotional pain and trauma. And that's what I find. And when we get to the issue of truth, that's what's happening. Truth is now, you know, when I was a boy, you know, you could say this is truth. And now truth is this, I don't know, amorphous thing being pulled this way and that. And that creates, in what I see in society, a lot of grief.
So truth used to be pretty solid when you were growing up. You had a feeling, clear sense of what truth was. But now it's like truth is sort of amorphous and constantly changing, and that just creates a lot of I'm hearing maybe anxiety that you see because it's unclear what truth really is.
Right, we can't find our footing, and that's why I do believe in you know, in an empathic dialogue, because I think it is the slow, you know, steady work of listening to people. Like, you know, that's what we did in special ed. You know, you would be presented with a problem that was societal in nature, and it was easy to kind of give up. But, you know, one kid at a time. Like, who are you? And let's listen to you. What do you feel? And then truth between, in my case, between the teacher and the student was negotiated. I had to understand where they were, meet them where they were, and try to present them with a more psychologically healthy model of how to integrate experience. And I'll stop there.
So you're seeing that truth that comes from sort of this empathic dialogue where you meet people where they are, you engage in this dialogue, and you sort of negotiate what the truth is, but by sort of hearing each other and sort of negotiating what's real.
Right, not a negotiator like it's a business negotiation, but like negotiating in the sense of, by hearing people, by starting with, you know, feeling into the other's experience, you know, relating that to, you know, myself, and then finding something that works for everyone, you know, including the other people in the class. I had always had to think about that.
So it's really about hearing where they are. It's not like negotiating the truth, but sort of seeing how it resonates to your experience, and then also to the experience of others in the class, and sort of connecting that together.
Right, and I'll just end with my great grief is how effective those sort of interventions and dialogues are, and yet I don't find it exalted in the scientific literature, although I think that's changing.
Yeah, so you really see that dialogue is a way to come to truth, and maybe even connection is, you know, effective, but you don't see the science really sort of advocating for that.
And just quickly, not just dialogue, but as April, I think, wisely pointed out, a felt experience, a multidimensional experience, not just listening to the words, but deeper than that. And I'm done. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
yeah, so really hearing the felt experience of each other. It's not just a cognitive thought of it, but really sensing those feelings.
Right. Thank you, Edwin. I feel fully heard.
Okay, great. I'll speak to Rupert then.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's that whole, you know, how do we kind of express the felt experiences? You know, I would really like to get better at that. That's something I sort of dwell on too. You know, like maybe we can speak sort of cognitively about connecting or about feelings, right? So, you know, what does that really mean to sort of express the feeling? And so, yeah, I kind of wonder about that, because I think it would even help with the empathy circle, make it a deeper experience.
So this topic that you were just discussing is one that you're really interested in, and you think it could be very useful for empathy circles if it gets felt into more, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's exactly, it's like it could make it a deeper experience. And like, how do we speak from what the felt experience is? Like if I just feel into my body, and it's like one thing I notice is there's so many different feelings in different parts of my body. I don't even have vocabulary to express, you know, the different feelings. Like some of them are pretty, you know, I have a name for it, but a lot of them are sort of subtle, and I can't even really, you know, clearly express them.
So maybe there's something to know, or some wisdom to come out of feeling into the way that the body experiences these things. And you notice that when you start to notice what's going on in your body, there is quite a lot, and some of it you don't even have a vocabulary for yet.
Yeah, and that is a truth. For me, that is a truth, is the felt experience that I'm having. So if I'm speaking from my felt experience, often, like even now, I feel a little bit of a numbness in my head, you know, because I feel kind of a constriction, you know, kind of holding things together, and it creates sort of this numbness I can sense in my head.
So there is a truth to these felt experiences, and you would love to be able to express that better, including the ones in your head.
Yeah, and the feeling is sort of numbness, right? I can feel sort of a numbness in my head. It feels sort of constricting, right? It's like it feels a little, you know, my body is sort of constricted, and that's one of the feelings I have at the moment.
So at the moment, the feeling that you have in your head, which is striking you, is this feeling of numbness or constriction, and there seems something important to understand in that.
Yeah, it's and then another feeling is kind of deep in the heart area, kind of central, is sort of, you know, sort of a little pain. Yeah, there's kind of a pain, a little anxiety, kind of deep in there. I can sense that at this part of my body.
So in your heart center, you're feeling some pain and anxiety, and you're able to voice that. And again, there seems something important about it.
And then another feeling is sort of a broad floatiness. It's kind of like this floaty kind of feeling that it's kind of warm, and it's like being in a warm bath, kind of, you know, it's a floaty warm bath kind of a feeling that kind of surrounds, you know, all this. And I notice as I say that, a little bit of that anxiety comes up into my throat as I'm saying it. So it's dynamic, right? These feelings are sort of moving and are dynamic, and just by sharing it, a little bit of the anxiety has come up into my throat.
So in and around your whole body, there's this kind of floaty feeling. But then when you express that to us, it instantly starts to change and maybe turns into or gets expressed through, or there's a concern around it, which comes through as anxiety. And that shows you something about the way that these felt experiences are dynamic. They're not just objects there to be observed. They alter when you when you observe them. They change over time.
Yeah, it's when I share it and then I actually hear the reflection from you, you know, so it's kind of getting out there, and then it's like, oh, I'm getting a reflection of this, I'm seeing this, and then, oh, it's starting to move. It's a little bit of a, you know, internal bodily dance that's kind of happens. And then I notice by talking about these feelings, I start getting more, you know, the anxiety kind of comes up, and there's these little fluttery, you know, little anxiety, you know, in some sense it feels kind of good, because kind of around the edge of the anxiety, it kind of breaks up something.
So there's a kind of circuit that forms between you and your listener, and the reason why there's this dynamic nature to the felt experiences is not just to do with time passing, it's to do with that empathic reaction, or that involvement of your listener, and that again seems to release some anxiety, but maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's and then I was kind of curious. Oh, you know, I'm in this relationship with Rupert. He's reflecting what I'm saying. What is the felt experience I have between him and I? And I just sort of noticed. I just noticed your smile, which was kind of nice. It kind of livened. I just felt a little liveliness just seeing your smile. You know, I just felt, oh, it feels good to see Rupert's smile.
So these felt experiences, maybe they're not restricted to an individual person. Maybe they can really be kind of shared, or somehow like a field, there's a sort of field of empathy or something like that going on. And you got a sense of that, especially when you saw me smile in response to what you were saying just then. And it feels quite alive and positive.
Yeah, I enjoyed seeing you smile. It gave me a little sense of joy to see, oh, Rupert smiled. He's kind of happy, or it's like, that kind of made me happy to see you happy. Like,
yeah, so when I was smiling, there seemed to be a kind of positive mutual circuit of happiness that was growing as a result.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll speak to Nicole.
I'm listening.
So yeah, well, it's true. I feel a lot better now. We'll see how temporary or permanent that is. I guess that's one thing that I think is deeply true about the kind of process I was trying to describe when I was talking to April earlier, namely that there is, and this is what Edwin was saying just now, there is a kind of fluidity to these emotions, and that fluidity can be rapidly increased by having the experience of sharing these emotions. So if you're alone, you may be more liable to get stuck in grief or depression or despair around the environmental situation. But if you can share it, you're much less likely to get stuck. And that's what I passionately believe, that we desperately need to share this despair, etc. But that it's not healthy to just get stuck in it. So there's something great about the process of liberating it and fluidizing it with other people.
I hear you noticing that there's been a change in how you feel, and that you're noticing that that change becomes more possible and empowered when you're not all alone, and that when you do have someone to listen and reflect, that starts, that those changes, those feelings start to move and even improve, in contrast to when one's alone and thinking of truths such as the really difficult ones about our world. And you're noticing that when that movement can't happen, that then there's a stuckness that happens, and that's, you know, comparably less, definitely like less of a desired outcome.
Yeah, thank you. Just one thing though, I don't think that they're truths. I think that they're truths, and I think that we really have to resist, absolutely resist, going down this path of this sort of postmodern relativistic path that the far right wants us to go down, ironically, of saying, oh, well, you have my truth and I have yours. You've got your facts and I've got mine, and so on. I think if we go down that road, we're absolutely finished, which is why they're trying to take us down that road. And I think saying that is quite compatible with what April said earlier, which I also think is kind of right, that that doesn't mean that truth is kind of simple, and it doesn't mean that it's just kind of one kind of object which you can go up to. It may sort of unfold and get more deep and complex and so on. But there's still a profound distinction between truth and falsity and bullshit.
I hear you speaking to the distinction between truth, which is like a fixed kind of static way of maybe believing something, and then truthing and that flowsome, more emergent discovery of what circumstances are. And I hear you. I hear your kind of skepticism and maybe frustration with the leftist kind of way of like fixing truth and not getting more curious and flowsome about exploring it.
Yeah, that's part of it. But it's also that while acknowledging all of that, what we got to do is be absolutely clear that that climate change denial, for instance, is post-truth bullshit, and that there's no reason to give it the time of day. The Extinction Rebellion demand to tell the truth. Yeah, it turns out it's not entirely simple to do that, but it's an absolutely necessary demand, and it's a profound ethical demand that we need to rise to. We need to defend the truth at a time when some people, including some very powerful people, are trying to despise it or to pretend that you can wish it away.
Yeah, I hear you speaking to the ways that there are people who despise and wish away the phenomenon of climate change, and that I see you speaking to the responsibility that we have as people who recognize something more than that, to be with that attitude in a way that challenges it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it comes to the empathy that you spoke of earlier. We need to have empathy for those people, but that doesn't mean we have to be fooled into believing the things that they've been fooled into believing. The way to have empathy is to really understand. God, it must be really, really difficult to be in that situation when you're so desperate to whatever it is, hold on to your way of life or something. You can't dare to sort of open your mind and open your heart. But we've got to do that while remaining really clear about the fact that facts are facts, and climate change denial is nonsense.
Well, I hear you kind of pulling out into this possibility that in relation to people who have like fear and fixation on denying climate change, that we might bring empathy around that, and maybe make it more possible for them to let go of their denial, and how that's tricky.
Yeah, thank you. I feel heard.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Bill?
Listening.
Thank you. I noticed that when I was hearing the sharing around people describing and talking about their desire to have a more felt experience and to really get open and expressive around the sensations, and to bring language and vocabulary around them, I noticed that there was a lifting in me of like, and I think that lifting, I would call that hope. And it kind of lifted, and then also I could feel it pushing some grief out of me, I think.
Okay. So you were strongly affected by the talk about the feeling of that was talking about, rather than just like cognitive definitions. And when you felt that there was a lifting in you, and you identified that as hope, and you felt that allowing yourselves, and I'm reading in a little bit here, but allowing yourself to do that kind of lifted that grief out, and and I assume unburdened yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and it wasn't that strong. It was actually quite subtle, and and what came with it too was this kind of, I felt like I heard a part of myself saying to another part of myself, who knew that these men had that going on in them, and if they do, what does that mean for all the other people who kind of occur to me as very mental, very, thought and idea oriented, though maybe it's just a matter of what they dare to mention around me, around anyone maybe, and how that kind of habit that humanity seems to be in, where especially men just bottle it up and tackle things with their heads, and maybe don't even, let alone have words for what might be going on, but let alone not maybe even feel it at all.
So you wanted to correct me a bit and just say that feeling was very subtle, and so you wanted to emphasize that. And then you were talking about that led you into considering people, and really considering the strong emotions that various leaders, men in particular, have experienced, and that there's so much more there than men are allowed to show. And then you're exploring the sort of stresses and about holding that down. How might that feel? And there's a re-exploration of that, I feel.
Yeah. And that how, even though today these things moving in me are subtle, the Nicole of not very long ago, and maybe the Nicole of tomorrow might have, like she used to, far more often, very powerful feelings of just pent up grief and anxiety, fear and anger in me that kind of edged out even my potential to feel joy or love. And how what's made a difference for me is to have put myself in places where I will be safe enough to have this incredibly powerful emergence and expression of emotions. And one of the ways I've done that, my gosh, I almost, like, I'm kind of holding back a little because I don't want to go into a sales pitch, but my gosh, you don't even have to buy the tools. You can make them yourself. But like, even on my desk right here, I have this box of Love Smart cards, which is basically a box of vocabulary to put to the feelings that might be going on, and the needs, longings, values, and desires that might be giving rise to those feelings as they're met and unmet.
So you were kind of contrasting various states of yourself, like the Nicole of yesterday and tomorrow, and which I feel emphasizes the immediacy of the moment, and how wherever you are, you're in the moment, and you're and you're really coming to terms with that. And one of the things that in coming to terms with being in the moment is handling your emotions, interpreting your emotions, and you find that there's this box of cards where you don't want to become a salesperson, but nevertheless helped you identify very subtle things and help give you perspective and balance, I'm feeling. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you. And space. Yeah,
and space.
I
Okay.
feel heard. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. April, will you listen to me?
Lovely, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Um, Well, I find myself sort of washed over by emotion, and that seems to be the theme for this weekend. And so it's interesting because usually I'm not at a loss for words, but I'm finding that that I am that I am at a loss for words because I'm, as everybody's talking about this, I'm feeling all these very strong emotions, and I'll stop there.
You're at a loss for words, which is not something you're often familiar with. This weekend, even as we're talking about all these emotions and sensations, you're kind of awash with a lot of things that are leaving you speechless.
Yeah, or at least difficult to express, and so I wanted to this whole idea of men, and then also we were been talking with doctors in Brooklyn and New York, and how not only that, but both in the medical profession, both men and women are expected to be these super men and women, and how nobody was listening in the midst of this crisis. Nobody was really listening to them. So I'll stop there.
That you've been talking with doctors and hearing something about the missing quality of listening for both men and women, that is, even in the expression of lots of things, not feeling heard or not landing somewhere. So
yeah, and I guess I made a decision personally, flawed though it might be, to actually feel into my emotions in life. In other words, let them come through, and then I become stronger. And because of the nature of my work, I was dealing with a lot of trauma and tragedy and things like that. And I did it for 40 years. So I felt that, and I'm relatively intact. I'll stop there. The operative word is relatively.
So you chose to take the path of finding expression for your emotions, or allowing them to flow through you, seeking a way to flow them through you, and that you have worked with that in your workplace, which has involved listening to lots of trauma and abuse, and that you have come out of that relatively unscathed.
Yeah, and so that's why I think I'm trying to get empathy circles introduced in the schools. And I also don't feel like I want to be seen as a salesman here, but nevertheless, I value it because I think that this listening practice allows the release of those emotions in a much less destructive way. It creates a safer place, not a completely safe place, but a safer place. And so, and not only that, unlike other therapy practices, there's not this therapist, patient, or client. The actual person is growing in their skills. So I'm not saying here to the student or whatever, this is this wisdom I'm giving you, but basically we're sharing a space and we're both growing. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, so in that then, recognizing that this quality of listening is so valuable that we that is part of the Empathy Cafe. That's why you are so committed to bringing that into the educational environment, and recognizing as well that doesn't have a kind of hierarchical teacher and student. Everybody taking part is growing and learning in the practice of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I feel like I'm trying to see what what I can do, and so that's, I kind of leave it there, is that I'm trying to see what I can do, and I'm done.
And this is part of seeing what you can do.
Thank you, April. I really appreciate you listening to me.
Thank you, Bill. I would speak with you, Rupert.
Go ahead.
I actually wrote something down about the quality of listening before Bill brought that up. For me, that's one of the key components of empathy. This, what we're calling empathy in this cafe, and that has been, grown in that MVC language, this empathy, there's some connection between two. In this case, we're talking about humans. I'll stop there.
You're noticing, you've been thinking about listening in the context of what we're talking about, and thinking about how empathy functions as a crucial part of that, in the kind of way indicated already by the practices of nonviolent communication. And I also sense an interest in how this goes beyond human beings to encompass other beings as well.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So if part of the key is being able to express emotions such as grief, if that's part of the connection that we're building, and the quality of listening is key to building that connection that allows us to feel, we say safe enough, but to feel held enough to be able to express those emotions. The leap that I make, that I regularly make, and I think lots of people who are expressive about with their emotions have, is a leap to being able to practice that same quality of listening with other than human beings.
So it's really important that we're able to share an emotion like grief. That's a crucial part of the work that we're trying to do. That requires real empathy or involvement on the part of the listener. And you want to take this kind of understanding and apply it beyond the interhuman context.
I'm not sure that I want to. That's what I do.
That's what you do. Okay,
and that's my route to two things. So lots of this conversation is rooted in human centrism, as if this connection that we have, we call empathy, is only between humans. And my lived body experience is that is not only between humans. And that part of the oppression of the disconnect between us and the natural world, that if you look back in that line of all the things that contribute to where we are now, the oppressive behaviors, that severing the oppressive behaviors that have severed us from the connection for the other than human world, sever us from a vast experience, lived body experience of sensations and emotions that live in the living world that we've cut off from.
Yeah, great. So your felt experience is already of that empathic connection going well beyond the human world. And your understanding is that we are deprived of so much if we don't recognize this, and that we desperately need to experience, as you've been experiencing, the way that there can be deep empathic connection with other than human beings.
Yeah. And the bit that's hard is that is grief filled because of what we've done, because of what we've participated in. So like the story of, Black Lives Matter, of the oppression of people, or of patriarchy, all of these things that oppress us and cut us off, when you tackle it with the empathic listening that it needs, it is heartbreaking. To recognize our own participation, to make different choices, it's heartbreaking. And so it's that, the same thing like in Extinction Rebellion, bringing people the truth and watching their hearts break as you tell them the truth, as you bring them to that realization. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, so I hear and I see your experience of this grief, which is inevitably what one encounters when one opens up this empathic connection with other than human beings, because it's absolutely necessary and brilliant for us to do this, but it's also inevitably heartbreaking, because then we're actually joining them in their catastrophic experiences at our hands.
Yeah, thank you. I feel really hurt.
Thank you, April. Yeah. So I'll go with Edward.
Listening.
Yeah, that was incredibly powerful, of course, and takes me back to where I was earlier. So I've cycled through the happy bit now, and and back into the knowledge of this heartbreak and the experience of it. And the bit I want to focus in on is what I alluded to earlier, namely that I feel horrible sometimes when I impart to people information about how deathly the situation is. It's a really hard thing to do. I'm worried that people may shoot the messenger, but it's worse than that. Is that I just feel bad about subjecting them to this stuff, even though I know it's good and necessary, and there's no other option. It's sort of terrible that we have to make these kinds of choices to tell the truth.
So it feels really bad to you. You have bad feelings when you have to tell people the truth, and it's just it's like just feeling those bad feelings, but kind of feel you have to do it.
Yeah. I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting to me. Unsurprisingly, I feel it especially strongly around children, young people, etc. But I also feel it incredibly strongly around my immediate family, especially perhaps my mother. And I don't quite understand why that is. But I have a little bit of a theory. And the theory is something like that, that she's such a lovely sort of warm person who's, been so loving and motherly and so on to me. And I kind of don't want to bring it into her lovely, warm kind of world. And maybe also it's like, she's put all this tremendous energy into raising me and my sister. And part of what I'm telling her when I tell her about how bad I think things are and are going to get is that maybe, we won't live to be as old as she is. And there's something really kind of very, very horrendous about kind of bringing that to your mother.
Mm-hmm. So something that feels really horrendous is when you share with your mother the kind of the horrors of what might happen with the environment, or you feel will happen with the environment, and you see that she has sort of a warm feeling, around her, and that when you bring this in, you're sort of bringing in this kind of downer kind of energy, that can kind of maybe has an effect on her, and it feels bad to you to have to do that, or to do that.
Yeah. yeah, and I wish it wasn't like that, you know. I just really, I really wish that. Well, I don't really. No, I'm glad to be doing what I'm doing, but I wish that it wasn't necessary. I wish that, in a way, I wish that the time I was born into was easier, and that one didn't have to go through these really deep and horrible kind of pressures. And yeah, it's like in Lord of the Rings when Frodo says to Gandalf, I wish I hadn't had this responsibility thrust upon me, etc. And Gandalf says to Frodo, oh, that's what everybody wishes who's born into times like these, but you know, that's nothing you can do about that. Your role is just to do what you could do in the situation you're in. And that is what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really seeing that it's kind of have that responsibility for sharing what you're sharing, and it sounds like part of you would kind of wish to not be in these times and have sort of this burden to deal with. And
yeah,
but you got to kind of do it. You feel like,
yeah,
imagine it's a sense of responsibility, or maybe that responsibility to truth, or
yeah, and just having to go through these things, like having these conversations with my mother. It's really, really hard, and I think that, yeah, sometimes I wish I'd been born a generation earlier, and then I wouldn't have had to have these conversations with her.
Mm-hmm. So it's especially hard to go through it with your mother, and like, oh, if I just had been a previous generation, just could have enjoyed all the stuff out there, and the raping of the world. If I could just been part of that and enjoyed it, and not have all this guilt or, you know, sense of responsibility, perhaps.
Yeah. I thank you for that, Edwin. I like I said earlier, I think this is part of the value of these empathy circles. You can go through these kinds of sequences, and there's a bit of a sort of unburdening.
So something you're appreciating is sort of the unburdening that's kind of happening in these empathy circles. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I feel heard.
Okay, great. Speak to April. It was just while I was listening to other people, it was like a little light bulb went off. Said, "Oh, Rupert's here. He's very influential in XR. I better make a pitch for." So this is the advertisement portion of our empathy circle.
I heard that you recognized Rupert as an influential person in XR, and that made you sit up and decide to feel like you had to make a pitch for empathy cafes.
Yeah, so exactly. So one thing I've been advocating for is that, you know, with XR, is that XR brings forward more of the empathy circle process. So if there's critics like the Policy Exchange, who wrote they're kind of a right-wing group. They wrote a really critical piece, you know, basically saying XR is terrorists or whatever. And to invite them into an empathy circle, that sort of the means are the end. So to have an empathy circle with them, it would be a way of sort of modeling the world that we want, the truth, you know, the beginnings of this truth telling. And it's sort of, it models the kind of the world. So the means are the end. So we want to hear you, we want to empathize with you, and we want it to be done in an empathic way. And, you know, they might not want to do it, but that's where the action, you know, kind of comes, you know, would this take part. We lost 2 people of our circle. Yeah.
Oh no, the influential one.
Oh, and here I made my pitch, and he did say he was going to leave at the bottom of the hour. I know.
Yeah.
But he gets the gist.
Yeah. And I hear that, you know, the idea of an empathy circle would be a model in modeling, you know, it, and in practice, the very things we want to hear, the opposing views unfolding, being listened to, reflecting, understanding, and, you know, each side getting an equal amount of time to share their piece.
Yeah, and
and
we're
feel
trying to,
heard.
yeah, exactly. We're trying to teach this sort of mindset behind what we're doing here, and having a real serious conflict in the empathy circle. It kind of gets people's attention. They say, oh, there's a conflict. I want to go check that out. So it would actually help sort of spread the message by the nature of the conflict.
So you think that people are more attracted to come along if they think there's some real opposing views within the Empathy Cafe itself, and that attracts more people, which then spreads the word of empathy cafes as a useful tool.
And the other part is to have the demand to do that with the government too. You know, that we want the government to, or the people in power to have empathic dialogue to model. Because I've seen like Rupert and, you know, Skeena and others do TV shows, but it's all sort of doing the normal cultural structures, right? The TV show, short discussion, you know, kind of gotcha questions. So you're kind of playing their game, right? It's playing the culture's game instead of saying, well, let's have a new culture, and here's sort of the new process. And this is like one, you know, first step for doing that, seems to me.
Yeah, you have seen people like Rupert and Skeena being on TV and then sort of normal paradigm of talk shows, and you get your few minutes and then it moves on, and or you get set up opposing a couple of people, and it's all very the standard mode of what sort of promoting on television looks like, and you're offering this as a different model to actually kind of step into the new paradigm of having empathy about problems rather than just setting them up to have a fight.
Yeah, and another thing that's just coming, I'm so glad we've done this series. It's just been so fun to be in these calls with you, April. So yeah, just want to celebrate that. I
hear you celebrating being in the calls with me, little uninfluential me. Oh, if only you knew.
The truth of the power that you hold. So yeah, well, let me just say, I think we already got you. We're already, you know, we already got your commitment. So yeah, I feel heard.
Okay. Yes, I'm already on board.
You're already on board.
As
exactly.
a good, as a yes.
Yeah, I feel.
And
heard.
Expressing, yeah, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
There was one thing that I've got to choose. Bill, thank you.
Listening.
Yeah, just one thing that came up when just even thinking it brings tears to my eyes, but when Rupert was talking about sharing with his mum, and I've been living with my mum for the last 3 months, really unexpectedly, and very tight conditions, like it's a total lockdown, it's a care home, you know, I don't go out. However burdened I am by the weight of what I feel I can't turn away from here in telling the truth. I feel much more sorry for my child and what they're going to go through. And they could do without some of the shitty stuff that's coming out now, you know, some of the things that we should have dealt with already and that I would take on now. I will talk to my mum so that my child doesn't have to talk to me, because what they're going to have to deal with is so much, I say worse, but, you know, just so much more.
So you were reflecting on what Rupert was talking about in reference to his mother, and talking to her about climate change and wanting to keep her somewhat sheltered, and then you reflecting it and comparing it with your situation where you're with your mom unexpectedly in tight quarters. And as you reflect on that, you feel that as painful as it might be to talk to your mother, you would do that because the pain that's going to be visited upon the younger generation is so much greater that we have to basically try to do whatever we can do to advance the agenda.
Yeah. And I think that also stands for patriarchy and racism and all the other social justice issues that the way we framed this first demand, it seems like aren't part of our agenda. And they are, you know, for me, they are all absolutely deeply interconnected. You cannot look back to the past and find the roots of one without finding them all just utterly, you know, bound together.
So you were talking about the first demand and how it really, to really look at it in a very thorough way, means that it also addresses the issue, or, you know, patriarchy and racism and, you know, a lot of the ills and narrow focus of our time.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to try and extricate them as if one, you can only deal with one.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
I understand. Oh, okay.
That's right. Just that there are a multiplicity of problems that we need to deal with as a comprehensive goal.
Yeah, and I understand, you know, it's overwhelming. And the more that we don't do, that we don't take on right now, the more we are burdening our children with. Because one way or the other, all these issues need to be addressed for humanity to step forward in a negotiated relationship back with nature.
Mm-hmm. So in really addressing all of these societal ills comprehensively is the basis for also addressing and showing the same respect that we have for other people, for nature as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, they can't, yeah, it's doing the future a disfavor to try and separate them. And separation is part of where the cracks get driven in and the chisels break us apart. Recognizing this is all interconnected and needs addressed with a much bigger shift than just tackling one issue at a time, as if we could sort out the climate and then we'll deal with racism, or we'll sort out racism and then we'll deal with the climate. It's all one big crazy nest.
Okay, so there are two things. One thing you want to emphasize is the need to act now, and how just waiting is increases the burden on future generations. So you want to make that clear. And then the other thing is that we really have to deal, again, focusing on a comprehensive dealing with all these societal ills at the same time, because we can't necessarily just do it in our own time and decide, okay, we'll do this and then we'll do that. It all has to be dealt with in a comprehensive fashion.
Thank you, Bill. I feel very...
Okay, thanks. All right, Edwin.
Yep, listening.
Okay. I was thinking of, you know, and maybe humor is somewhat of a deflection, but I was thinking what April was talking about, and I mean, animals and the natural world are suffering. It's profound and it's not funny. And I go out in nature a lot, though, and I try. Well, how do I negotiate, you know, with animals and stuff? And what I've come to is that they're doing their job. They have a job to do. They can't go to the grocery stores, and so I kind of, when I come to, you know, I see an animal in nature, it's sort of like, well, what are they doing? And they have to do that. So would I like a deer to come into my classroom and start pooping on the desks? No. So maybe I shouldn't go and startle the deer, or, you know, or be disruptive. I'll stop there.
So you go out in nature a lot and
Mm-hmm.
interact kind of personally with nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you're kind of questioning what you're doing in terms of going into nature like that because you wouldn't want them to kind of come into the classroom and poop
Well,
on your
I sort of, I guess you know, we can always increase our perception and our sensitivity. But what I try to do is just to remember as a sort of baseline is sort of like when I'm going into an animal's, you know, environment, that I'm going to their job. And I have to show them the same respect about them doing their job as I would want somebody to show respect to me when I'm doing my job.
So you're realizing they're doing their job, kind of what they're responsible for doing, and you want to be able to have respect when you go there for their lives and what they're doing, just as
Right.
you want people to respect you for what you do.
Mm-hmm. And so, and one story was I was paddling out in Monterey Bay, and there was a whale, humpback whale out there, and they have these long pectoral fins, 12 feet high. I guess they must weigh maybe 1,000 pounds or more. And I wasn't really paying. I was just, you know, paddling along, and all of a sudden, this big pectoral fin comes down and it's about 30 feet away, and it goes boom, and it's pointing right at me. And, you know, and I was startled, and I said, whoa, you know, what's happening? I'll stop there.
Yeah, so you do a lot of kayaking. You're out in the ocean, and there was a whale came, and its pectoral fin came and slapped down, and it actually was pointing, towards you.
I mean, I just got the sense.
Close.
I mean, who knows? I'm sorry, but I got the sense that it was like pointing at me. And then I realized there was another group of kayakers sort of around it. If you drew like a 30-foot circle, they were at another point. And then I realized that, oh, wait a minute, I'm coming from both sides. The whale feels hemmed in. This is what orcas do in order, you know, to attack from different sides. I'm giving out the wrong message here. And so I then paddled around the circumference of this sort of imaginary circle and joined the other kayakers. And then the whale was kind of displaying, and it was flipping back and forth, but it seemed to be quite content, by that. I felt possibly egocentrically that I had gotten the message, but at least I'm here to talk about it.
Yeah, so you were kind of interacting with this whale and just thinking, oh, maybe you're sort of scaring it because it might think you're like orcas surrounding it.
Right.
And so you actually went to one side so it would feel more comfortable and more safe.
Right. And so I've always remembered that, and I always use that as sort of a baseline when I'm presented in nature with a new situation. It's like, wait a minute, I'm at their job. So how do I show kind of respect?
So when you're out in nature, you really kind of have a sense of they're doing their job and kind of thinking how you relate to them with a sense of respect. So you've got a bit of a relationship going on with them too.
Yes. We don't double date, but yes, I'd like to think so.
Okay.
I feel fully heard. Thank you.
No double dating. Yeah.
No.
Well, okay. Well, I'll speak back to you then.
Okay.
Yeah. It's. I was just thinking about April's comment about that. You know, it seems like everything's the issues, problems are all intertwined, and you know, how do we address that? You know, that bigger intertwined problem.
So you're thinking about what April said and the complexity of the problem we face, and forging a comprehensive response to it.
Yeah, is there like something that's some answer to the larger intertwined problems that we have? And I wasn't quite sure, but I was just sort of sitting with that question.
So you're contemplating that question, and you're considering, is there some sort of holistic response to it? Is there some key maybe?
Yeah, and it's like, and then also like, well, what's the relationship of empathy? You know, so empathy actually the word got coined from the German art aesthetics philosophers. They were looking at artwork and then noticing that when they look at artwork, the feelings change. You sort of like feel your way into the painting. And then kind of the word sort of spread to be the sense of feeling into, you know, others through psychology, and April's talking about feeling into nature. So it's really the felt experience is like central to how do we have I think it's about the instead of dominating sort of, right, it's like constricted, closing down, trying to control. It's a matter of being more sensitive to the felt experience that we have, like the sort of an open, unconstricted felt experience. So when you're out paddling in nature, you know, you're sensitive to the felt experience you're having. You are sensitive to the whale, right? It's like, oh, this whale, you're feeling that fear that it might be sensing. You don't know if it was right. You could have asked for a reflection. Whale, are you feeling fear? Would you reflect back, you know, or did I reflect back accurately? So
So you're exploring this like and the role of empathy. You talked about the history of empathy in the German art movement, or art period, where they talked about feeling into a painting, and then it was transposed and adapted for use in psychology. And the key for you there of the definition is to feel into. And then you're using about how that applies in a variety of different situations, including my experience with the whale.
Yeah, and the broader nature, how do we feel and be more sensitive? And I think it's a type of feeling, right? It's like that we feel into, not in a constricted way, trying to sort of control, but that we sort of are sensitive in it's sort of a type of feeling into a feeling of maybe sort of an openness, or sort of a open unfolding versus a constricted kind of controlling feeling.
So you're talking about feeling into, but not as a way to control or manipulate, but to be open and flexible so things can kind of grow in their own way.
Yeah. And so it's just that, you know, to be sensitive to those feelings, even that controlling, right? That controlling, constricted, so that numbness, you know, for me, the numbness in my head comes from the controlling, right? If I control, I kind of constrict, you know, I try to focus, and maybe it has its place too, but it does have consequences, and the consequences is that, you know, I get a numbness, and that's a feeling too. The control is a feeling. The numbness is a feeling as well.
Okay, and you're contrasting an experience of feeling into your own sense of control, which creates a numbness, as opposed to like a more empathic one, which is a more flowing, accepting feeling.
And, you know, I think to open up that constriction and that numbness, I find this is sort of the naming of it. Oh, I'm feeling constricted. I'm feeling numb. That it kind of gives it space to kind of open up. And so I think that sort of the sensitivity to those feelings and a naming of them helps open them up.
So when you're saying that you can name a feeling or experience, that helps you, you know, gain perspective, and then allows other points of view. So that is a freeing or more flexible point of view.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's perspective. It's just space to unfold. It's not so much a perspective. It's just a space to open and unfold. So yeah.
Okay, so it's not for you perspective, which sort of triangulates things, but it's a more dynamic feeling of opening.
Exactly. I feel fully heard, and I think that's about our time too.
Yeah, so, I think so too. Yeah.
Should I close the room, or I'll hit
the
close room? So we got a minute. So yeah, you're muted, April.
Yeah, I just didn't get that time to reflect back how much I've gotten out of, particularly being here for 10 weeks and during lockdown, this extraordinary time, and having this experience over those 10 weeks has really kind of 11, now 12, my goodness, has really kind of embedded my appreciation of this practice. And yeah.
Well, I
I'm
hope to hear more about it too, just your
appreciative of that.
experience, you know, to get some of the, you know, maybe make some separate video clips just about your experience, sort of a debrief at some point too.
I don't know that it would help.
Yeah, well, it was
My
after,
little uninfluential voice.
well, it was after Rupert Siskina's empathy circle. You watched that, and it was a very beautiful, you know,
Yeah.
comment that you had about that. It was just, yep.
Okay, are we all back? Okay, great. Well, welcome back. I hope you all had a rich circle experience. A few people had to drop out in our circle, but they send their best wishes. And so what we'll do now is to just kind of do a very quick summary, about a minute or less, of your circle experience. Before I start, Edwin, is there anything else you wanted to mention at this time?
No, I think that's it.
That's good. All right, Gregory, could you start us off?
It was I think it's my third one, and I found it actually a little bit easier in some ways, and more really enjoy it. Really enjoy it. I'm not sure what to say. I think it's this is great. I mean, I want to learn this method of listening better. I find myself still struggling to listen deeply. So this is very challenging for a privileged white male.
Okay, thanks. James?
Yeah, my two takeaways. I love this demand, tell the truth. It's foundational, it's wonderful. And I don't know how to make it a demand. I don't know how to make people tell the truth. If someone does, let me know. But for myself, I do try to tell the truth and take the consequences of doing that to the extent I'm able. And I'm appreciative. I'm really appreciative of Rupert Reed's talk at the beginning. It really set a tone that was worked for me.
Great. Thanks, James. April.
Yep, this is my 13th Saturday in a row. Is it 13? No, 12 in a row. That's quite, you know, that's like, wow, I never go anywhere on a Saturday night. Yeah, I've really appreciated, you know, that deepening in the attunement of the listening. It gets better, Gregory, and definitely the more that you take part. And you can apply it in other situations. The reflection, that kind of, so it's a bit like stepping into somebody else's truth. That's the thing, you know, a perspective of an event that happens, you know, three people standing around it will have different truths about it in terms of what they saw, how they experienced it. So I know that, I mean, Rupert talked about this, that, you know, we can't have different truths. That's slightly different for me. We do hold different truths because our life experiences grow us into alignment with different truths, show up differently in our lives. So there's scientific truths, which is what we're trying to call certainly governments into alignment with. But for me, this has just shown to me, and this last few weeks has shown to me how it's way too narrow to say we just want to tell the truth about the climate. We don't want you to tell the truth about anything else because that's too hard. It's all there. It's all part of the truth that we need to come into engagement with if we're gonna deal with this like grown-ups that we are, and not dump it on our kids to deal with later, which is what they're gonna have to do with the environmental crisis anyway. Then we got to deal with it all the horrible truths. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Marguerite?
Yes, yeah, we had a very deep sharing of different sides of the question, but I was it was just at the very end, Michelle was talking about empathy and how to create empathy and have empathy for nature, you know, the whole problem, and we were cut off, but it was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite. Edwin.
Yeah, what really stood out for me was we were talking about the truth of the felt experience. Everyone has their own felt experience, and that is a certain truth that, if we feel numbness or we feel fear, we feel anxiety, grief. So those are truths of our felt experience. And then in comparison to maybe scientific truths of, the temperature, carbon levels, that's like another form of truth. And then there's the feelings, a lot of different feelings, being sensitive to the feelings I have, feelings of others, as well as nature. I think Bill was talking about his being out in nature with the whales and the animals and sort of the feelings into that. So that's sort of where I am with just, and that's empathy really is the word empathy is feeling into. So I think it's very central to the whole empathic process yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Edwin. Maureen.
Yes, I think we had a very interesting, stimulating time, and I didn't understand very well the demands and the principles, and I was wondering, having 10 principles, why we need to have 3 more demands. So having been through that discussion, I saw the importance of, in fact, telling the truth, at least telling my truth. If I can't have the truth or the whole truth, I have my truth. This is my bit. And if I can't express that and stand over it and get it out there, I've seen it, I'm promoting the status quo. And if I don't get it out, I can do the consequences. And Extinction Rebellion, in a way, is trying to question the status quo and bring a new thinking into the situation. So I thought that was a revelation to me in terms of why Extinction Rebellion has this. Now, I found it very interesting at the end, and Marguerite has commented on this as well. I feel that, because Michelle brought it up, kind of a new element coming into it for me. Why, when I'm growing my plants, when I'm growing my vegetables in my garden, and watching them grow, and the whole process of eating very, very good food, I am then in touch with a whole kind of cycle of life. And I get an understanding of the interconnectivity of things. So when I go on the streets, then I feel I'm coming from a deeper place somehow. And suppose what I felt as Michelle was talking, I felt I was kind of resonating with this deeper energy in nature, this life, something about life, the life flowing through the trees, the life of the birds, the whole of creation, in a sense. It, she will maybe talk about it herself. When we go out on the streets, where are we carrying that? I see myself on the street. Where are we carrying that energy? How are we carrying it?
Great.
Thanks
a lot, Maureen. Thank you. Michelle?
The circle was really, really powerful. I like, there was so much that had emerged during it. Like, I could see where my blocks were telling the truth of, like, fear of getting it wrong, and wanting to people please, or over time having gotten to kind of conditioned to the status quo, so it was really, really powerful, and an idea had emerged during the discussion, which was with the empathy circle of would it be possible as an idea of saying to Zoom, the company, of would lobbying them to support XR, that there be another box in here, another dialogue, and it have Mother Nature. So treating Mother Nature as a living organism, and that, you know, that she turns up at each of the meetings, and so community gatherings, yeah, that all community gatherings, that they consider her like as a living person, that they share love and compassion and empathy for her, and consider her like what's come out of their meetings and their gatherings, what impact is it going to have on her, and maybe even encourage people to dialogue with her as part of the gathering. It was something that I think collectively emerged from our session. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Well, the theme that came up for me was very, very touching, very rich. Even when uninfluential people speak, they're very rich. And so I find that they're not so uninfluential as they might say. And this theme of really treating nature and bringing it into sort of the human community in a way was really emphasized and very strong. And so I really appreciate the way it was addressed from a different number of points of view. We've kind of come to partially to the end of our time here. I just want to let people know that we are having facilitation training, and that's ongoing. We also are having on Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, that's on the West Coast. We do have a regular empathy cafe that right now we're exploring the principles of a culture of empathy. And then on Saturdays, we're continuing. The next demand is Act Now. And I'm not quite sure exactly who our reader will be. Oh, April. Okay, great.
And Gail.
Mm-hmm.
Gail will be doing the part about the carbon emissions, and I'll be doing the part about the halt biodiversity loss.
Okay, so another great session coming up. Edwin, are there any last words you want to say? Okay, all right. So
yes, thank you, Bill, for hosting us.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. As always, I'm always enriched by your sharing. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for facilitating, James, too.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It's
Everyone
amazing.
taking part.
Bye.